All right. Great, Gabriel. Thank you. So what is it that, how did you get the opportunity to do the TED Talk?
That's an interesting question. I think for quite a few years I thought I'd really like to do a TED Talk, and I'm trying to figure out how you get to do it and really sort of, you have to do talks like this, and then maybe you might do a TEDx, which is one of the more local ones, and then you might be able to send it to them. And I'd been kind of thinking about that and thinking, I wonder if I should embark on that process of trying to get to the stage where I could do one, and what would it be on. But then I'd been working on climate change a really long time now, 30 years, and I've done most different aspects of it. But I came across this whole topic of carbon removals, and I'd written about it. I'd said that it was important, but I hadn't really properly paid attention to how big a play this was going to be, how important it was going to be, and especially the shock of how big the gap was and how slowly we were filling it. We weren't really filling it at all. And so I became very passionately committed to trying to do something about that. And that turned into a mission to try to get carbon removals on the agenda at COP26, a big climate conference in Glasgow. And as part of that, I started working with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the high-level champions, all the people that were involved in COP, and they were working with TED. So as it happened, I was going around the place telling everyone I met, we need to do something about this. That's how I got to be collaborating with the climate champions. And I got a message from one of them saying, listen, TED is saying that they're going to do a climate conference and they're looking for talks on this, on all aspects of climate. And I said to them, because of what you said, we should have something on removals, and they're going to call you. So what was really nice is that Ted called me because
That's
of that
great.
relationship with the climate champions. And when they called, they asked me all about removals, about the state of play, and at the end of the call, they said, okay, please do the talk. So that's how it happened.
Great. And so how did you plan it?
It was actually, and I've given a real lot of talks in my life, and I still do. I give lots of keynotes. I've done loads of radio, television. So I've a lot of experience in this. It was the hardest that I've ever done. And that's partly because they tell you that you have to, I mean, you only have 12 minutes, but also, and it's very high production values, but also if you get it right, then it has the potential to have massive impact. And if you don't, then you've missed a really big opportunity. So I felt the pressure of that. And also you have to learn the whole thing. There's no teleprompt. So basically you just have to learn it. And they tell you all sorts of tricks for how you can do that. But basically you go up on the stage with nothing and you just got to talk for 12 minutes. They fact check everything. So you've got to make sure that you get it exactly as you said you were going to. But it's got to feel very natural, like you're telling the story now. So that was a big challenge. But then writing it, there's a story. And here's the story. I was trying to think about what to say about carbon removals and how to get into it. And the two parts of the story are this. One of them was that I like walking a long way. My name's Walker. Maybe that's the reason. And I was walking on a thing called the the Great Highland Way, which is where you start in Glasgow in Scotland and you walk all the way up to Fort William. It takes about 5 or 6 days and sorts of mountains. It's very beautiful. And on the way, as I was walking, I thought that guy who someone told me about has his carbon removal stuff somewhere near here. It's on the Isle of Mull. I'm practically walking past it. What if I just give him a call and see if he's available and I could go over and see his stuff? So I did. And I saw some very interesting things that stuck in my head. That's one part of it. And then the next part of it is I was struggling and struggling. I wrote one version which I thought was rubbish, and they didn't really like it either. And they were sort of tweaking it here and there. And I went to the Natural History, no, the Science Museum here in London for inspiration. They had an exhibition about something to do with carbon management. And I was so appalled when I went in there. On one side, it was all people with hard hats and machines and artificial mechanical things and engineering. And then I walked through that, and on the other side, it was all decals of trees and sunlight and pretty things. And it was such a stark divide. And I thought, that's not what it's like. I almost felt sick that this was what they were saying. So I came home and I thought two things. One, what do I do about that? And the other, what did I love most about that experience on the Isle of Mull? And so in both cases, I went with where did my emotion go? I knew the facts that I was trying to tell, but where did my emotion go? And in the museum, it went, no, it's not like that. We have to put it together. It's all about nature and human ingenuity going together. And when I was on the Isle of Mull, the thing that enchanted me most about it was the woolly pigs.
Mhm.
So that was my clue for how I should write this opening, at least, of
Right.
this.
And we talk a lot about coming up with a narrative structure. And my coaching has always been just very simply, we have a problem, it's bigger than you think. Here's the solution and here's the value. And basically you did that. I mean, it was like you had the cues and you did it in 12 minutes, which is spectacular. And what we haven't talked in the group about is that you had a hook. And so you ended up using the woolly pig as what we would call a hook. And that's the introduction, and it sets up a question, and you don't answer the question until the end.
That's exactly it. And so that experience on the Isle of Mull comes in the beginning and the end. But one thing I want to say about that hook is it's always there for a reason. Everything I write is always a kind of, first of all, you grab them, and then you tell them what you're telling them. And then you tell them why you're telling them, and then you tell them the same thing again so that it sticks, and then you sum up what you've told them, and then you leave them with something that gives them in a way, I when I was teaching writing, I'd say you need to, that the opening and closing are hugely important, because the opening sets the tone and the closing leaves a taste. So the opening sets the tone and the closing leaves a taste. And if you can connect them together in some way, even better. But here's the other thing. I had a challenge because I was speaking to a room full of climate people. And normally, if you do a TED talk, you're speaking to a room full of lots of different people. But this was the first time TED had ever done a conference entirely on one topic, entirely on climate. And so many people in the climate story, climate movement, are extremely skeptical about carbon removals. And they were even more so in 2021. So I knew I was going to have hostility. I was going to have people who didn't actually want to hear what I had to say. And I thought, I have to disarm them. I have to hook them, and I have to disarm them. So they put up a big barrier, and then something comes from the side and they go, what? And then the armor falls, and then they're a bit more ready to listen.
Yeah. So you did your hook, and then you immediately did a presumptive close on the problem. I was just saying you can't believe that we don't have a climate problem. And I mean, it was, you're not still there, are you? You're not denying, and you're not thinking carbon removal is carbon capture. And it was very presumptive in the way you hit it in that room. Actually, I saw Joe Biden did the same thing in Congress the other night when he looked at them. He said, I think no one's really still denying this, are you? It was brilliant because a lot of them aren't. And you would just look stupid if you said yes. And I think that's where we are.
I think that's true. And I think a lot of that is the task of winning the audience over so that they'll actually listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
So not using kind of words or approaches that will immediately trigger a shutdown, but also intriguing them. And also, I think it's an important clue that I do think you need to go with your emotions and not just go with where you think their emotions are going to lie, but go with your own emotions, because what touches you probably will touch other people, and that comes across as much more authentic than if it feels like you're trying to say something that will appeal to them, but it doesn't really appeal to you.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job of that. So why don't we watch a bit of it? Let's go through the hook and then through the kind of presumptive, you can't believe this anymore, right?
So I'm going to talk to you about carbon removals, and I'm going to start with this. This is a woolly pig. She's gorgeous, obviously, and she's also one part in a whole new set of approaches for dealing with climate change. They are all called carbon removals, and they all involve taking CO2 out of the sky and storing it somewhere safe. I'll come back to the woolly pig later. But first, why do we need carbon removals? Because I know what you're thinking. Isn't it easier to stop putting the carbon in the atmosphere in the first place? And the answer is yes, of course, it is. We have to do everything we can, as fast as we can, to stop carbon getting into the sky and stop climate change getting worse. That should not be a controversial point of view at this meeting. But the problem is, we've left it too late. We can't now do it fast enough. I've been working on climate change for more than 20 years, and I've talked about it in boardrooms and classrooms and everywhere in between. And I was shocked when I found this out, but the science is utterly, utterly clear. If we're going to have a fighting chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, that safe limit, we have to have carbon removals. And it looks like we're going to need a lot. Scenarios from the Energy Transition Commission, from the International Energy Agency, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have all shown that we're going to need billions of tons of carbon removals between now and 2050 to give us a chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. We're going to need both reductions and removals. But there's another more harsh...
Could you pause it there? So what I'm loving about this is, I think there's a word in jazz called phrasing. And what it means is that the meaning, the emotion of the music is in your voice and is in your body, and it all works together as one thing. What emerges from that is authenticity, and it's just kind of a beautiful energy. And it's uniquely you. You have a unique voice, unique kind of physical posture, and it just is all aligned. And we trust alignment. We don't trust misalignment. If your hands weren't going with the voice and your body wasn't going with your hands, then we wouldn't trust you as much as we're already beginning to trust you. And so it's one of the rare times I see somebody talking about science and you just rattled off a bunch of facts, but it really registered in a way facts don't register by themselves. So and you also change tone with almost every 2 or 3 sentences. You go from a loud whisper to something that's firm, to something that's frightening, and the genuine emotion goes with it each time. And so that's why I picked this out. It's rare, and it connects. And the other thing I love about TED Talks is you can measure how many times it connects with people, and you're well over 1 million views, as I recall.
Yeah, it's heading for 2 million, which is really nice.
It's heading for 2 million, and it's going to go to 10 or 12 because that's what happens when it gets up to that level. So you couldn't reach more people with a 12-minute pitch on a problem that people would just as soon not hear about, and trust you in the process. So as we continue to play it, I'm suggesting people watch, because we've watched this once before. We kind of know what the process is. But if you deconstruct a little bit and say, what is it that makes it work, and what can I replicate myself? Almost everything you're doing here is worth copying, if I could pull it off. So any thoughts you have, Gabriel, on that? Are you conscious of doing those things when you're talking?
You're really making me blush. So thank you for saying these lovely things. I suppose I do. Some people have asked me, because I know sometimes I'm moving, sometimes I'm not, but particularly the way that my voice will go from whisper to loud to firm to the way my hands move. I'm not really aware of that. I'm aware that I'm trying to tell this part of the story, and it's like my body kind of takes it over. But one thing I say that I did learn, and that I noticed happening here, is that I learned to be able to slow down and sometimes stop to to give a moment for something to land.
There you go.
And someone once told me that if in a way, if you control the silence, you can kind of, you have the room in your hand, and it doesn't feel like controlling it. It feels like holding it. You're holding their attention, you're holding their emotions, you're holding their experience. When I'm standing there like that and I've gone silent, that's sort of what it feels like. And just doing it long enough that people can go, that mattered. It's like marking important points with silence rather than with kind of shouting or with rushing.
Yeah, couldn't say it better. The power of the pause. And again, you do it beautifully. So as we go forward, I think paying attention to, and one more thing I'll mention, which is a really big problem for most people, and that is you finish your sentence with a strong word in a lower voice. You don't go up a note, you go down a note. And the combination of that going down a note at the end of the sentence and pausing is what gives you gravitas. And gravitas here is so important. And you're not overdoing it, but you do it periodically. And most of us these days, particularly in the US, are finishing our sentence on a high note rather than finishing our sentence on a low note. It makes all the difference in the world. So as we move forward, those things are going to become more apparent. So why don't we play some more?
Why we need carbon removals. They also give us a chance, our only chance, not just to stop the problem getting worse, but to make it better. Because even 1.5 degrees isn't actually safe. We're not there yet, and we're already experiencing the fires and the floods and the droughts and the storms. With carbon removals, we can take our historical emissions out of the atmosphere. We can clean up the mess we've made, and we can give our world a chance to heal. So what do the removals look like? Well, I've been talking to a lot of people lately about carbon removals, from business executives to climate activists, and they tend to go one of two ways. They either think of trees, or they think of big futuristic machines. Nature versus tech, green versus chrome. But the more I've dug into carbon removals, the more I've realized this is not the right way to think about them. Because the world is full of ways to store carbon. You can store it in trees, you can store it in soils, you can store it in the ocean, you can store it in buildings, you can store it in rocks, you can store it deep underground. And every one of those approaches requires some combination of natural resources and human ingenuity and technology. We're going to need both nature and technology. I'll show you what I mean. So if we start on the natural end of the spectrum with trees, now I still find it astonishing that every single tree and plant on Earth has made its entire body directly from carbon in the air. They're incredible carbon capture machines, and we're going to need a lot more of them. But we also have to do it right. Because if you put trees in the wrong place, they burn. We have to put trees in places where they foster biodiversity, where they don't compete with food for land, and where science and technology tell us they are likely to survive even in the face of climate change. Now, if you don't want that CO2 from the burning trees to get into the sky, you can actually burn the wood deliberately in a power station, capture the CO2 and bury it in a process known as BECCS, which also gives you energy as a sideline. But if you want to keep the carbon locked up in the wood, there are technological ways to do that as well. Like this one, look at this. A whole new movement to use wood as a building material in modern high-rise buildings. And that's a good idea for at least 3 reasons. First of all, it keeps the carbon locked up in the wood. Secondly, it displaces high-emitting materials like concrete. And thirdly, the buildings are gorgeous. You can also use technology to help carbon stay locked up in soil. Storing carbon in soil sounds like a good idea, and it is a good idea. The question is, how long does the carbon stay there? Because if you change your agricultural practices for 1 year, 2 years, that's fine. But if you ever go back to the old ways, the carbon goes back up into the sky. That's where this stuff can help. It's called biochar, and you make it by taking wood and burning it in the absence of oxygen until you get this. It locks the carbon up in the wood, and now it can't burn away. Now, it turns out that biochar is very good for soils. In fact, indigenous people in the Amazon have been using it for generations to improve the quality of their soil. We can do that on a much bigger scale, improve the soil and lock up carbon. That's nature and technology and indigenous wisdom all in one sweet package. You can use technology as well.
So two things I'd like to ask. One is your choice of slides I thought were great. But what was in your head as you decided how many slides to use?
It is a great question. And when I'm giving a talk, normally I use many more. And I make sure my slides are all, they're basically pictures. Sometimes I'll overlay it with a quote. Very, very rarely I might have something that looks a bit more like numbers or a graph, but almost never. And so the pictures are there to kind of anchor the story. And what I find is that if I have a slide that has too much information on it, then people start to pay attention to the slide and not to me. And then it's harder for me to keep their emotion. So remember I said that it sort of feels like holding the room and holding the space and having them listening to me as a human. And if their kind of attention goes too much to an image, then I lose them that way. So what I was trying to do is choose images that would reinforce the message. So as they're looking at it and listening to me, they're getting the same kind of message, but also that would not mean that they had to kind of concentrate their brain and they'd snap out of the kind of emotional connection, if you like.
Yeah. You did it absolutely perfectly, I thought, and I think that's great thinking. And I also notice with the TED Talks, it looks like you're restricted to that ring that you're standing in.
Yes.
How do you manage the stage? Because for everyone, the question is, how much do you move and for what reason?
They were very helpful. So you do rehearsals online, then you do rehearsals in person. And when you do the rehearsal in person, you have to be wearing the clothes you're going to wear, and they have 6 cameras trained on you. It's all very complicated, but also they give you comments about how you move around and your style, and the cameras learn to track you. And one of the things that they told me that I hadn't really properly paid attention to, because you're restricted to this circle and you can't just go and point to your screen as I sometimes do, and there's a kind of TED-like almost formality to it. It focuses people's attention on how you move. And even now, when I was watching this video again, I noticed at the beginning I was moving my hands a lot in the first 30 seconds or so. And that was a reflection of the fact that I was actually nervous. I never get nervous before talks, but this one I was. And you can see the moment where I stopped being nervous because I stopped moving my hands like that. So that's one thing that I would observe. And I find, and this is really good advice if you're ever going to give talks in person, however painful it is. And I find, honestly, you're saying lovely complimentary things about this, but I always find it difficult watching myself. I always find the things that are wrong every time I'm watching. But what I would say is video yourself and look at it and see how you come across, and get your friends to look at it and see how you come across. You can almost do it with and without sound, because I think we pay so much attention to the content, and probably 70% of the impression that people are going to get is from the movement and from the body language and from all of that. But so to answer your question about moving, one of the things that they said, apparently at one point I was just shifting from one foot to another, swaying a bit, and I didn't know I did that. But they're professionals and they caught me doing it and they said, don't do that. And what they said was, if you move intentionally. Move intentionally. And if you want to emphasize a point, stop on that point. And then maybe even have pause afterwards. Use the way that you're moving around the stage. And it might be so that you move to one side for one set of people, another for another, so that you're making sure that you're bringing everyone in and you're showing the world that you're including everybody rather than just standing in the middle. But they said, don't just move intentionally, and move in balance with the points that you're trying to make and the rhythm of how you're making them.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think moving after you said something important and you're going to slightly change into another paragraph that's a different topic, giving people to digest the last paragraph while you move 2 or 3 steps and replant your feet is like a pause. It pulls the whole room back to you as you begin the next thing. And that's exactly what you did here. And at this point, you have one hand in your pocket. So it has a casual look. It looks very relaxed look
I was
compared
in
to
a
the
groove
open.
then.
You're in the groove. It
I'm
seemed
in the groove.
natural. Yeah. And once you got into that groove, then it gets even better. So
Well,
why
one
don't we
thing
continue? Yeah.
Well, just before we do, just one thing I noticed here as we were watching, it's that, so, I was noticing that, so I'd say, look at all the things about the wood. It displaces this, it does this, it does this, and so, and then I gave this kind of, and it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. So this one,
Yeah.
my favorite word, I've used it twice, right? And that it was I was having fun at that point, and you can see that I am with the way that I'm smiling about it, but also I'd gone kind of serious, and then it was walking around, and then it was this, and then stop. And
Yeah.
so I think that I was noticing the different tones, like, this is important, it really matters, but we should be enjoying it, or what's the point, is one of the vibes that I was getting from that bit. Oh,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just the other thing I'd say about is I for years I did boxing,
Mhm.
and you're moving around all the time because you don't want someone to hit you. So that's a different kind of moving. But my trainer used to say, he said, never try to do a punch when you're moving. You plant your feet to punch. He said, and you draw your strength. You must draw your strength out from under the ground. And I think that there's something there that when you plant yourself, it's you're drawing strength and gravitas. When you're moving around, you're giving a kind of dynamism and energy, and it's the balance of the two that I think probably helps.
Beautiful. Let's continue.
To speed up natural processes. So this is basalt. It's a volcanic rock. You can find it more or less everywhere on Earth. And it naturally takes up CO2 in a process called chemical weathering. Unfortunately, it takes thousands of years to do it. But you can speed up the process if you grind up the rock and spread it on fields. And then you can speed it up to just a couple of years. And like biochar, it's good for the soil. You get minerals in the soil where you need them. And when it washes off into the sea, it can also help with another big bugbear of climate change, ocean acidification. And if we did this on 2/3 of the world's croplands, we could potentially take up to 4 billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year, which is a very big chunk of what we need. Now, these approaches so far, like planting trees, take a lot of land to be able to get them to scale. But there is one approach where you can actually do it in a very small amount of land, but still get to scale. It's called direct air capture. And it basically involves massive electric fans blowing a lot of air over a carbon capture device. Now, okay, this does look like a big futuristic machine, I admit that. But it's still marrying technology with a natural process, geology, because when you capture the CO2, you bury it deep underground. Now, this is an artist's impression of a plant that's being designed by Carbon Engineering in Texas. Its aim is that it will take up 1 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year. And I love this bit. Where does it go? They put it deep underground in the same geological formations that the Texas soil was originally squeezed out of. I love the poetry of this. It's like reversing the valve and putting the CO2 back where it came from. And recent studies have shown that if you do that, 98% of it will still be there in 10,000 years. When you put it down, it stays down. Now, this is still a little bit futuristic. It's still in the planning and design stages. But this carbon capture plant started operating this year. It's smaller scale, but it's already doing it. This is Climeworks and Carbfix in Iceland. They're using geothermal heat to power it, and they're putting the CO2 into the Icelandic basaltic rock. So one issue, though, with direct air capture is it takes a lot of energy to power those fans. And that energy obviously has to be green. It has to be clean. You can't use fossil fuels for it. But it also makes it much more expensive than other techniques. And it takes energy to cook wood and to grind rock. And so all of those approaches I'm talking about are currently much more expensive than planting trees. But we can do something about that. We can invest in it now, do the research and development, and get them down the cost curve to make them affordable. It worked for solar power, it worked for wind, it can work for carbon removals too. And remember, we have to get to very big scale, billions of tons of carbon removals by 2050. But we can all help by reducing our emissions as much as possible and figuring out how to remove the rest. Now, I'm not talking conventional offsets. I put a ton of CO2 in the air and I pay you not to put your ton in the air, but my ton's still there. Now, what I mean is, I put a ton of CO2 in the air. I pay someone to take a ton out of the air, either now or in the near future, and we can get to zero and beyond. What goes up must now come down. And if we all do that, if we all make that commitment, then the people trying to make removals happen will have the finance and the courage and the confidence to be able to get to the scale that we need. I don't know which of all of these approaches, in the end, are going to be the ones that we're going to have to use to get us to the scale we need. But I do know that we're going to need a whole spread of them, with nature and technology working hand in hand to take CO2 out of the sky and keep it out. Which brings me neatly back to the woolly pigs. Now, these woolly pigs live on an estate on the Isle of Mull, which is owned by Jim Mann's Future Forest Company. And I know they don't look very dangerous, but they are actually the closest you can get to a native Scottish wild boar without having to have a dangerous animals license. And they do what the Scottish wild boars used to do. They rootle up the undergrowth left over from selective grazing. They let the seed bank come to the surface so that native trees can start to grow and start to take up CO2 from the sky. But they're also planting trees in this lovely place, native broadleaf like oak and this beech tree. And it's plenty wet enough on the Isle of Mull that they're not likely to burn. So that's so far so natural. But they also have machines. This one is getting ready to cook wood for biochar to go on the soils. And they've also got a quarry with basalt, the quarrying basalt rock. They've got machines to grind up the rock. And they've got machines to spread it on the fields. That's 3 carbon removals approaches in one beautiful place. Now, it's just one estate. But all of these approaches and more are hugely scalable. The world is full of places where you can plant trees and put carbon in soil and grind up rock and spread it and capture CO2 from the air and find places to store it underground, all of those things. And there's hundreds, thousands of people working right now to get those carbon removals approaches out of the textbook and into practice, and to help us, God help us, reverse the damage we have done and start the process of climate healing. And when I sat on that hillside and I saw the pigs rootling and the trees growing and the machines getting ready to cook and grind, I loved it. Because I experienced an emotion that those of us who work on climate change very rarely experience. I felt hope. Thank you.
All right. Once again, I loved it. What goes up must come down is the meme, and it comes right at the right point. It's delivered beautifully. There's a call to action, and there's inspiration, and finally, almost a choked up emotion. And it's bing, bang, and boom. You got it.
Well, thank you for saying such lovely things about it. It is very strange. I haven't watched it for really quite a long time, and it's nice to know that most of it is really held up. But also, I think as I was watching towards the end, it's really, whenever I'm giving a talk, and especially a talk like this, it's an exercise. It's an exercise in storytelling, but it's also an exercise in telling the truth. And it's telling a truth to people who don't necessarily want to hear it, but it's also looking for a truth inside yourself. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning the point about the woolly pigs and about the experience at the Science Museum. It's what gave me, I was angry at the Science Museum. I have to do something about this. And when we went to see all those things that Jim Mann was showing me, he wanted to show me the trees and the planting and the biochar and the rocks and the, it was very early days and so on. He wanted to show me all of that. But he said, first of all, let's go see the pigs. We just had lunch in his house with his kids and his wife, and then we rushed off and then we went to this place first and he went, Piggy, Piggy, and they all came trundling along and then we went and did the other stuff. But I remembered how excited and happy he was, and I was too. And I thought somehow going with my emotion might help to connect with someone else's. And one of the things that I'm actually proudest of about that talk is that, I had some friends in the audience, of course, and one of them told me that there was someone near them who was shaking their heads and looking angry when I was introduced that the talk was about carbon removals. And they were one of the people who jumped up to do the standing ovation at the end. So that was like, it's like I got him. And the biggest pressure, as I said, was you've been given this opportunity, use it. And so it's a massive relief to think that maybe I hadn't blown it completely.
Well, that's a beautiful prologue. We thank you so much for taking the time. It was just a delight to meet you in person, sort of. Where are you located?
I'm in London.
Well,
so just finishing my day as you're starting yours.
Yes. Well, you have a good evening, and we'll have a great time tomorrow with this.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. And thanks for all the lovely things that you said.